Story continued from Utahraptor episode. Across the floodplains of the early Cretaceous, many herbivores are on the move, from the heavily armored Gastonia to the giant Meiosaurus. All are making their own journeys in search of food and water, but at this time of year they are all outnumbered by one species. The large herd of Iguanacolossus have arrived, and they are steadily marching across the lowlands. At up to 9 meters long and 5 tons, just one needs a huge amount of food. The hundreds of individuals marching into the area have the ability to completely change the landscape. This is why they are constantly moving, searching for new growth to feed themselves. Fortunately, they can eat just about anything, from soft leaves to hard cycads. Even twigs and bark are on the menu. Their batteries of teeth grind down anything they put into their mouths, reducing it to an easily digestible mush. They can even rear up on their hind legs to access food other herbivores can't, though they can't reach the tops of trees. Those are left for the sauropods that aren't impeded by the massive herds. Smaller herbivores like Valkarius, however, have to make do, but also have to avoid getting crushed by the giant herbivores that trample through their territory. Many will break away from the main herd in order to feed alone on the harder to reach areas like rocky outcrops that will only allow one Iguanacolossus to move through at a time. One female has secured a small area all to herself and feeds on the low-lying shrubs. She pushes her head through the vegetation but picks up an unusual scent. Something has walked past these plants recently. Still chewing, she raises her head and looks around, not sure if whatever left the scent is harmless or a threat. Not seeing anything and unable to hear anything over the bustling herd behind her, she rears up onto her back legs and gets a better field of view. The vegetation surrounding her is low, and so can't conceal any large predators, but the rock formation could allow smaller carnivores to sneak up on her. After a full scan around herself, she sees nothing. She is about to go back to feeding when there is a rustle of leaves to her left. Looking to the source of the noise, there is definitely something moving through the low-lying vegetation. In fact, there may be more than one. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw something move between cover and caught the glimpse of a theropod's tail. The female let out 3 loud bark-like honks. This was an alarm not meant to panic her herd, but to let them know that a threat may be close by. She then started to move back towards the main herd, when the rustling to her side became more intense. As she turned back towards it, the hidden predator burst out of the foliage, finally revealing itself. A Utahraptor sprung forth, leaping into the air after almost 30 minutes of crawling across the ground. Stealth now abandoned, the young hunter was now running towards the Iguanacolossus. The female turned around and began to run on her hind legs, catching a glimpse of a second Utahraptor jumping out of the foliage not far behind its packmate. The Iguanacolossus ran for her herd, that was steadily beginning to move away from the threat. She could outrun the predators over a long distance, but the 2 Utahraptor already had a head start and closed in on her before she could reach top speed. The first one ran right up beside her and leapt onto her shoulder, wrapping its arms around her neck and kicking his legs, trying to get a foothold. The second was not far behind and went for her tail, grabbing it with his jaws and digging his feet into the ground, trying to slow her down. But what neither of the Utahraptor realized was the size difference between the 2 species. They may have been half her length, but they were each less than 1/20th her weight. The Iguanacolossus turned sharply, and the Utahraptor on her tail was lifted off his feet, but still hanging on with his jaws. His limbs flailed for a brief moment, before the herbivore slammed the airborne carnivore into a rock. The Utahraptor crashed against the hard surface and fell limply to the ground, before groaning lowly. The first predator was still holding on tight, until the female suddenly stopped dead in her tracks, causing the Utahraptor to sail forward briefly through the air before he hit the ground and rolled twice in the dirt. Free from her attackers, the herbivore got up and started running again, but the Utahraptor quickly got to his feet and made another jump for her. This time she was heading straight for him, however, and the Iguanacolossus headbutted the smaller dinosaur while he was still airborne. The impact made him spin vertically, his limbs and tail sent in all directions, before he crashed back to Earth, far worse than his first fall. The large herbivore continued to run. She could see other Utahraptors were closing in, but they seemed to have given up after watching 2 of their pack get left in the dirt. She rejoined her herd, and was now safe. It would be a very brave pack indeed that jumped headfirst into an Iguanacolossus herd that numbered in the hundreds. Story continued after the facts section of the video. Hello fellow travellers and welcome back. Today we will be breaking down another mighty hadrosaur, Iguanacolossus. Iguanacolossus's first remains were discovered in 2005 in the Cedar Mountains formation of Utah, and wasn't named until 2010. The remains of the holotype include parts of the skull, teeth, vertebra, chevrons, ribs, right scapula, right ilium, right pelvis, right metatarsals, and left fibia. Though this individual is the only named Iguanacolossus, other material is currently under review to see if they are the same species. It lived in the early Cretaceous, between 140 and 135 million years ago. In life it grew to between 8 and 9 meters long, stood 3 meters high at the shoulder, and weighed up to 5 tons. It belonged to the iguanodontian ornithopod group, making it closely related to Camptosaurus from the late Jurassic. Despite the colossus part of its name, it wasn't actually any larger than a normal iguanodon. So what is the difference between the two? The main distinction is that they lived at separate times and locations, with Iguanodon being 15 to 20 million years younger and living in Europe, while Iguanacolossus lived in North America. Overall, Iguanacolossus is more basal than other members of its family, even those that lived at the same time. It was obviously a large, heavy herbivore that relied on its bulk in order to intimidate potential predators. 2 different teeth were discovered on the holotype, with one shield-shaped crown identified as a dentary, and a maxillary described to be lozenge-shaped. Though the back feet and arms are missing, scientists believe they were likely very similar in appearance to iguanodons, with the forearms having thumb spikes used for defense, 3 weight-bearing fingers, and a flexible pinky finger used to manipulate food, while the back legs were far larger and bore most of the animal's weight. Whether it would rear up on its hind legs in order to run isn't known, and it may have in fact been quadrupedal most of the time. It also isn't known if Iguanacolossus would have formed herds, though it seems that many of its relatives did, whether it be a family group or simply for mutual protection. We often think about these large iguanodontids as being easy pickings for big carnivores or groups of smaller ones, but these were very large and heavy animals, and would probably only have needed to throw their weight around in order to topple a large carnivore or completely flatten the ones that weren't in their weight class. We don't know a whole lot about Iguanacolossus itself, but it had clearly evolved a body plan that was very successful, as its descendants used it to spread across most of the world. Some of the species it lived alongside include Falcarius, a therizinosaur, Geminiraptor, a troodontid, and Mierosaurus, a sauropod. So, Iguanacolossus. A bit of a misnamed animal, but certainly deserves to be named such. But what do you think of it? And for my question of the week, do you think Iguanacolossus is the direct ancestor of Iguanodon, or just a result of convergent evolution? What lesser known dinosaur would you like me to do a breakdown on next? And until then, sit back and enjoy the second part of the narrative section. The Utahraptor that held on the longest was Strider, who was now steadily pulling himself up. The last fall was not his finest moment, and he had multiple abrasions across his body, including some small rocks embedded in his skin. It had also cost him a lot of feathers, which would have to regrow. That was nothing compared to what his brother had to go through. Strider looked to the rock that Rough Guts had been slammed against, hoping he hadn't broken anything. His brother stumbled into view, shaking his head. At least he could still walk. Strider knew that his injuries were nothing compared to the punishment the older members of the group could dish out to him, and some of them were about to arrive. Most of the pack held back, but the alphas Redclaw and One Eye came to gather the injured siblings, and as usual, Red Eye was not happy, already hissing in frustration and eyeing him with murderous intent.
That is the second time you attacked too early. Once again, you cost us the hunt.
Redclaw raged. Strider lowered his head in submission, hoping the verbal assault would not lead to a physical attack.
On top of that, you got yourself and your brother injured. What use are you if you can't help bring down prey?
Redclaw continued. The alpha was now over him, her teeth centimeters away from the back of his neck. She could have attacked him, but it seemed that the wounds he carried were enough of a punishment, and the alpha female eventually backed away.
Try not to mess everything up again, or next time you may not be welcome back to the pack.
The alpha finished as she turned and walked away. Strider looked over to Rough Guts and saw that One Eye was assisting him, but when he met the old male's gaze, the usual humble understanding was no longer present in his eyes. It was only a look of disappointment, and with that, Strider knew he had messed up worse than usual. The young Utahraptor slowly regrouped with the rest of his pack, but stayed in the rear, head held low and feet scraping along the ground. Then he heard light footsteps coming up behind him, and knew instinctively it was Swifttail, coming to gloat.
Well, that didn't go very well now, did it?
The female raptor teased, getting no response from the brooding Strider.
I mean, did you really think the two of you could take on an Iguanacolossus all by yourselves?
She continued, but Strider didn't respond. He didn't snap back, he didn't lunge at her, he just kept staring at the ground in front of him, barely even registering her presence. There was a long quiet after that, as Swifttail seemed to realize that his failure was different to the previous ones.
You know, I don't really want you to leave, right?
Swifttail whispered, making Strider pull his head up slightly to look at her.
I think I'd miss you, just like any of the others. So, are we still friends?
The female raptor asked, showing a rare softer side. Strider considered her words, and then let out a sigh. No, we're not friends. We're siblings. So you'll never really get rid of me, he joked. Swifttail nudged the side of her head against Strider's, a sign of forgiveness, and then ran up ahead. Strider now walked a little more confidently. He would prove himself next time, and regain his pack's confidence. He only needed one shot to do so.